you just get hit with a massive tax bill from an IRS audit? Here's what most people don't realize. Just because the IRS says the audit is final doesn't mean it actually is. In this video, I'll show you 3 legal paths to challenge the result and potentially reduce or eliminate what you owe, even if the IRS claims there's nothing you could do about it. Hi, I'm Pietro Canestrelli. I used to work as an IRS attorney in Washington, D.C., so I've seen firsthand how the IRS operates. If you're dealing with a tax issue and need guidance from someone who understands the system, give me a call at 951-319-7674 for a free consultation. Let me show you the first option most people don't even know exists: the IRS Appeals Process. When the IRS completes an audit and you disagree with the result, you have 30 days from the date of their decision to file an appeal. This isn't some obscure loophole. It's a formal process built into the system. You file Form 12203 and your case gets reviewed by an independent appeals officer who wasn't involved in your original audit. Think of it like getting a second referee to review a bad call in a game. The first referee made their decision, but now someone else looks at the same evidence with fresh eyes. Here's why this matters. Appeals officers have the authority to settle cases, and they're trained to consider both sides of the argument. Unlike auditors, who are often pressured to close cases quickly and collect revenue, appeals officers are evaluating whether the IRS followed the law correctly. If you can show that the auditor missed deductions, misunderstood your business structure, or applied the wrong tax code, the appeals officer can reduce or even eliminate the tax bill. But here's the critical part. If you miss the 30 days deadline, this option disappears. The IRS won't remind you, it won't give you extra time, and if you file incorrectly or without the right documentation, they'll reject it. This is where having someone who understands the IRS procedures makes all the difference. Now, what if you already missed that 30-day window? That brings us to option 2, audit reconsideration. Audit reconsideration is for people who either didn't respond to the original audit or have new information that wasn't available during the audit. Maybe you couldn't find your records at the time, or maybe you didn't realize the audit was even happening because notices were going to an old address. The IRS allows you to request a review of the audit if you can provide documentation that changes the outcome. Here's an example of when that works. Let's say the IRS audited your business and disallowed deductions because you didn't provide receipts. At the time, you thought those records were lost, but later you found backup documentation that proves all these expenses were legitimate. You can submit an audit reconsideration request along with that evidence, and the IRS will review it. If your documentation is solid, they'll adjust the tax bill. The key here is that you need real evidence. The IRS won't reconsider just because you asked nicely. You need to prove that their original decision was wrong. And this is where a lot of people make mistakes. They submit incomplete documentation or they argue their case emotionally instead of legally. The IRS doesn't care that the tax bill is unfair. They care whether the tax law was applied correctly. One more thing about audit reconsideration is that there is no official deadline. You can request it months or even years after the audit, but here's the problem. The longer you wait, the more interest and penalties pile up. Every day you delay costs you money. So if you have new evidence, don't wait. File the request as soon as possible. Now, if the IRS still won't budge after appeals or reconsideration, you have one final powerful option: United States tax form. When the IRS issues a notice of deficiency, which is the formal letter saying you owe taxes, you have 90 days to file a petition with the U.S. tax court. This is your last chance to challenge the IRS before the tax bill becomes legally enforceable. And here's what makes tax courts different from appeals or reconsideration is that you're arguing your case in front of a judge, not an IRS employee. Tax court judges are independent. They don't work for the IRS. Their job is to determine whether the IRS followed the law. If the IRS made an error, the judge can reduce or throw out the tax bill entirely. I've seen cases where the IRS claimed someone owed 6 figures, and after presenting the case in tax court, the bill was reduced to 0 because the IRS couldn't prove their calculations were correct. But here's the catch. You need to file that petition within 90 days of receiving your notice of deficiency. If you miss that deadline, the IRS wins by default, and you lose your right to challenge the tax bill in court. At that point, the IRS can start garnishing your wages, freezing your bank accounts, and putting liens on your property. The 90-day deadline is non-negotiable. Now, a lot of people ask me, can I represent myself in tax court? Technically, yes, but should you? That's a different question. The IRS will have an attorney representing them. Actually, many attorneys. Someone who knows tax law inside and out. And if you walk into that courtroom without legal representation, you're at a massive disadvantage. Tax court judges expect you to follow form or procedure, present evidence correctly, and make legal arguments based on tax code. If you don't know how to do that, you will lose. This is where my experience as a former IRS attorney makes a difference. I know how the IRS builds their cases. I know what arguments work in tax court and what arguments don't. And I know how to negotiate settlements even before the case goes to trial, which can save you time, money, and stress. So here's the bottom line. If you received a bad audit result, you don't have to accept it. You have appeals, audit reconsideration, and tax court. But each option has strict deadlines, specific procedures, and legal requirements. One mistake, like missing the deadline, filing the wrong form, or submitting weak evidence, can cost you tens of thousands of dollars. If you just received an audit result that doesn't seem right, call me at 951-319-7674 for a free consultation. As a former IRS attorney, I know exactly how to challenge these decisions and what strategies work. The sooner we start, the more options you will have. And if you're dealing with old tax debt from a divorce or separation, watch this next video where I'll show you what you can do. Don't let your ex-spouse's mistakes ruin your financial future.